Okie dokie.
And we are live, dead on time, I think, for very unusual for me and my live streams. We're dead on time. Welcome back, Lee Barrett, to the channel. We're going to be
Hi,
talking about,
Jerry.
we're going to be talking today about, the idea was to focus on the GBA, but we've been talking about this in the background. We're talking about the way China is leaping forward in terms of its technology, its society, all that kind of thing. So we're going to talk about China in general, but we're going to specifically talk about the GBA. So Lee Barrett, long time no see. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Um, Gordon.
It's great to be back. Thank you.
Yeah, well, Happy New Year to you and Happy New Year to everyone else who's watching. We're 1 or 2 days away, and I think Wednesday next week is the actual New Year's Day, but it's that time of year where everyone is saying Xin Nian Kuai Le and and those kinds of things because we live in Guangdong. So, yeah, and do a lot of that. And the kids are like that.
Yeah, gimme.
Yeah, the kids are all looking for a Hong Bao. So let's get started with the biggest story, potentially the biggest story of the decade, maybe this century. In fact, this year, 2025, in our calendar, has seen two of the greatest stories to happen to China about what's going on and where the future lies. And the one I want to start with first is the TikTok refugees, Xiaohongshu. How did that all happen from your perspective?
Okay, so unless you've been under a rock, you've probably been aware for the last probably year or slightly longer, the US administration under Biden was basically trying to outlaw TikTok. They were trying to ban it. And they used many excuses, national security, stuff like that. But the bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, is they got an app here which was not able to be controlled by the US. So they can't control the narrative on that app. And there's a lot of rumor that a lot of it was because there was a lot of support for Palestine on that app. And as so aware, the Israel lobby is very strong in the US, and it, the suggestions it was pushed by them to ban it. Well, as it came up to the time, the decision ultimately went to the top court. I believe it's the Supreme Court in the USA. And they ruled to actually, it was either ByteDance, which is the owner of TikTok, they'd either got to sell it to an American-controlled interest, or they've got to shut it down. And the court ruled at that point, ByteDance hadn't sold it. I don't think they were intending to sell it. There's a whole thing that it's controlled by the Communist Party of China, which is just nonsense. I mean, it's headquartered in Singapore. Over the time, the US put certain conditions on ByteDance to run TikTok in the US, which they complied with. It's like, they had to host all their data on American servers, which they did. They were controlled by Oracle. So they actually complied with everything they were asked to comply with. But push comes to shove, and it got to the point where it was in Biden's last days of the administration. He kind of deferred the ultimate decision to Trump. But it actually did go offline for a very short period of time. I believe it was less than 24 hours. But leading up to that, a lot of the Gen Z users of TikTok found out about this Chinese app called Xiaohongshu. Now, it's actually very different to TikTok. It's probably more like, I would imagine it's more like, what's the other app in the
Instagram.
US? Instagram, that's it. I think it's more like an Instagram. And when some of these users started sort of perusing through the feeds on Xiaohongshu, they were seeing a very, very different picture of China to what they were led to believe from all the Western mainstream media, stuff, and all what their government had been telling them for many years. And this was a massive shock to them. It was just like they were seeing a completely different world to what they'd expected.
Yeah. Do you think that I'm going to come in with a couple of comments about this later on, which I think will surprise a lot of people. But do you think it was a shot in the foot for the USA, or do you think this was quite deliberately all delayed so that Trump would get the win, the political win, I mean?
Oh, I think a bit of both. I mean, from a soft power point of view for China, this has been like a Sputnik moment. It's
Yes.
yeah. I mean, you just look at all the comments that these Americans are making. One, and this is something that living in China for many years, we both know just how friendly the Chinese people are. If you go on a lot of American social media, especially like X, everybody's at each other's throat. And
Yes.
these Americans were going on China saying, "Oh my God, the Chinese people are so nice to us. They're making suggestions. They're showing us all these nice things." Now, I know, I feel in some aspects it went a little bit too far. I mean, I saw one video saying, "Oh, this is the home of a normal Chinese person." Well, it was obviously not. It was obviously the home of a very rich Chinese person. But I think some of the everyday things where you had really normal Chinese people showing them. I saw one video of this young girl, and she's going shopping with her husband, and she's at a sort of traditional kind of farmer's market, and she's showing vegetables, and Americans literally can't believe the amount of stuff she bought for $5 because the inflation's been crazy there and it's very expensive.
Yeah. I buy 30 eggs in a tray every week or 2 weeks, just from around the corner from a very friendly lady. This is not a special price or anything like that. This is 22 RMB for 30 eggs. And 22 RMB is $3 and some loose change. So it's less, certainly it's less than 350. And that's 30. I mean, that's a very, very good price for eggs anywhere. But if I go a little further afield, if I go to the supermarket, they're a bit more. But this is outside my local market. It's only 100 meters from my front door, and it's 22 RMB for my 30 tray of 30 eggs. And I live in a city of 4 million people. In the United States, there's only one city bigger than the city I live in. You live in a city bigger than most states in the United States.
Yeah. I mean, I find this something that when I go back to the UK, it's one of the hardest things to explain to people just how big China is. I mean, we live in the province of Guangdong. That province is almost double the population of the UK, and that's just one province. And I think people just don't understand. I can go to a supermarket here and it's just an ordinary Saturday or Sunday, and it's busier than like a supermarket in the UK would be on Christmas Eve, and it's just a normal Saturday.
We get used to it.
Yeah. And actually, this is one of the reasons I don't travel at Chinese New Year, because the whole country is on holiday and everybody's traveling. It actually becomes pretty stressful for me.
Me too. Well, Fernando's got the trick there. He's actually foregoing his New Year's Eve and traveling overnight New Year's Eve because he thinks the roads will be empty. Good luck to him on that one.
I don't think that's going to be the case.
He's got about a 2,000-kilometer ride ahead of him on New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. But he's foregoing the celebrations to just take it. Because if you travel on the roads a day or two early before Chinese New Year, you will take 4 days to get to your destination.
For sure, yeah. But just going back to the Xiaohongshu thing, Jerry.
I was going to do that too.
Yeah, what I find like interesting is that I think I've heard of a lot of these Americans now saying, "Oh, we're going to stay on Xiaohongshu," and that's very interesting too. Because as you're aware, TikTok was restored, but something interestingly during that time as well, Douyin, which is the Chinese version of TikTok, also allowed international phone numbers to register. Now, that hadn't been the case before. Douyin was previously only for Chinese. And actually, I don't know if there's any truth behind this, but I've seen a few rumors flying around that the Chinese authorities are so amazed with what this has done, they're now thinking of trialing, opening up sort of broader access to some of the Western social media insights and piloting it in Shanghai.
Yeah,
Which
this
I
is
think
not a rumor.
is quite
This is a
interesting.
fact. This is going
Oh,
ahead.
oh,
It will
really?
start in March. It needs to be ticked off by the 2 sessions, but it will start in March as a trial period where they will open the internet. Now, they have said there will still be some restrictions. Now, obviously, in the West, they say, it's still censorship. It is illegal to show pornography, graphic violence. It's illegal to have hatred, racism, all those things, religion as well, online. You can't proselytize online. So there are certain aspects that are going to still be regulated. Now, Twitter or X has got a problem because there is a massive pornography. Most people who use Twitter in China, I'm told, use it for the pornography. Can you believe that?
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, I've experimented with that, and if you put some Chinese words into the search box, you do get a lot. So it's there.
Oh, okay.
And it's surprising too. I mean, I only did this because it was my students at the time. This is about 3 years ago. My students telling me, "Oh, we use Twitter for the pornography." Oh, really? I didn't even know it was there, but it is.
Wow. So, interestingly, Musk made a post on X or Twitter about that. You know, it's unfair because I can't. Something about he can't operate.
He can't operate Twitter in China.
But actually, he can. He just needs to abide by the laws, which mean hosting his data on Chinese servers.
Chinese electric car vehicle manufacturers can't sell their cars in America. So where's the balance?
Absolutely, yeah.
Tesla is here and getting subsidies from the Chinese government. Exactly what they're still complaining about.
Apple and Microsoft operate here, and that's because they abide by the laws of China. I find it incredible. I see a lot of these comments on X about this, and it's like, it's almost as if Americans think, we can operate in China with American laws. And that's not the case. It doesn't matter where you travel to. Different countries have different rules and regulations and laws, and you need to abide by them. And that's the bottom line. That's just how it is. And the same with Google, the same with Instagram, the same with Facebook. They could all operate here if they abide by the rules. And I get frustrated when I see so many Westerners keep saying, China have banned these. They haven't banned them. It's the point that they don't stick to the rules, or they don't want to.
There's an interesting aspect of that. One of the most important rules, and the reason Facebook did get banned, Facebook was the first, was the police, when they're investigating a crime, get a court order, and they go to the site host and say, we've got a court order, we want this information about this person, which is exactly what the FBI, the Metropolitan Police,
exactly the same.
Everywhere you go, this is what they do. And Facebook said, no, we're not giving you that information. This was after the 2008-2009 riots. Let's move on to, I just want to finish off on Xiaohongshu before we move on to the other stuff, because we could get bogged down in a really long one. Bogged down. It's quite interesting. We could open up a whole Pandora's box of stories. There are indicators that Xiaohongshu is now controlled by TikTok. Some of the TikTok censorship rules are now being applied. So the words, which I'm not allowed to say out loud or that gets demonetized, will not be allowed on Xiaohongshu. And the reason for that, nobody's explained. This started after they went dark on Sunday last week. So the other thing is, if you scroll through the terms and conditions, now I don't know if they were there before, there is a new term and condition relating to Facebook. That's two things. So inside the terms and conditions, the words Facebook are there, and it refers to Facebook's reviews. The third thing is that, it really is interesting. Now on TikTok, at the end of posting a video, you get the option to post to Instagram or Facebook, both of which are Meta products. So the indicators are there that if it's not owned by Zuckerberg yet, it's certainly got some influence or some degree of control from Facebook. So that's a very
Interesting.
interesting way forward for TikTok, because what's going to happen now is people are going to say, well, if I can't do what I want to do on TikTok, I'm going to have to go somewhere else. But then the truth is they can't do what they want to do on Red Note or on
Yeah,
Douyin either, because of the graphic violence and things like that. The
sure.
politics are not an issue. You can post things about Gaza and Palestine. That's not an issue at all. But you can't post murdered babies and stuff like that,
Yeah,
which
yeah, yeah.
which were going up on TikTok, but not on Facebook. So there's a
Mhm.
few issues there that these will settle down over the next few days, and people will realize what's happening. But right now, it looks like some degree of let's call it Zuckerberg control, rather than
Oh,
Facebook, Instagram,
interesting.
or
Yeah.
TikTok. Yeah, it looks like. But I'm not getting into what it is yet, because honestly, I don't know. I can only say
Mhm.
these are the indicators that they're there. So you
Ah,
described that as a Sputnik moment, and I think
I
you're
think
probably
so.
right. If that was the Sputnik moment, the next one we're going to talk about was the Berlin Wall moment, I think, or maybe
Yeah,
the
I
other
think
way
so.
around, because DeepSeek, Americans have deep state, China now has DeepSeek. You are much more of an expert on DeepSeek than me. Please tell me about it.
Okay, so if you've been following the AI sort of bandwagon for the last sort of 18 months, 2 years, you'll be know that much of the talk has been about Chat GPT, Open AI,
Yeah.
Meta's Llama, and Claude, which is Anthropic. And these have been the sort of companies that have dominated the news. There's been small mentions about some Chinese companies like Baidu and ByteDance, who are
Mhm.
also into AI. But there's not been much talk about this small, relatively small company called DeepSeek. And what happened about 3 days ago is DeepSeek released a model, a large language model, an AI model, onto the world that rivaled um, all these Western or predominantly American um, large language models from all these American companies. But the thing here, there's a couple of really key points here. The first thing is that these American companies have spent hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to develop these language models. And they've used huge amounts of compute power to arrive at where they are. Now, this DeepSeek, as far as I understand, they only have a few hundred employees.
Mhm.
And they've brought out this model, which you could say, to be fair, it's equal to the best models of the US. Now, there's a number of benchmarks that these AI models are tested against, and some perform better in certain tests and not so good in others. But overall, I would say it's pretty much equal. And in some benchmarks, it's beating the US ones. In some benchmarks, it's slightly behind. But overall, it's no worse. It's
It's a
it's on
peer.
par for sure. Yeah, it's
Mm.
definitely a peer. And they've allegedly, this has been produced on $5.5 million on much less compute power. Now, the reason why they've done it on less compute power is because um, China have been sanctioned by the US that they can't get hold of the latest NVIDIA GPUs, which all the American companies are using to train their models on. So they've been, to some extent, handicapped, and they've produced their model on a much less compute and at a much cheaper price. And this has really got Americans scratching their head. And if you've been on X the last couple of days, there's a huge amount of copium coming out of the
Oh
USA.
yeah.
They're throwing up, all sorts of reasons why. But I think that the CEO of Perplexity sort of nailed it. He did an interview where he says, look, okay, the Chinese are at a disadvantage on the hardware, but this has pushed them to be smarter and more efficient with writing their algorithms. Um, so they've achieved, with much less compute power and much less cost, the same as the Americans have done with like huge amounts of money, huge amounts of compute power to throw at it. And the CEO of Perplexity has said that in the medium to long term, this will be a massive advantage to the Chinese because they're learning to do things much more efficiently. And I compare it back to the day. So I'm old enough. I had a ZX81 computer, and the base model of that came with 1K of memory, 1K, 1 kilobyte of memory. But there was companies that wrote amazing software that you could run on there in that 1K. Because they only had 1K, they were super efficient in their coding. And then over the years, as memories become cheaper, code has become more sloppy and bloated. And what the Chinese have done with DeepSeek is they've gone back and says, look, we don't have a huge amount of compute power. We don't have massive, almost unlimited budget. So we have to use our programming skill to make this better. But Jerry, that's not the only thing. The bombshell here is that they've released it open source.
Yes.
Which means, well, they released it open source. They also at the same time released a paper to tell everybody how they achieved it, which is like unheard of. And this, within hours of that, you had literally people running it on their phones, their laptops, their home computers. Because literally you can download the whole model. You don't have to run it in the cloud. You can download the whole model and run it locally. And this is just like completely obliterated the model that these US companies were using. So just to give you a comparison, if you want to use the latest model of ChatGPT, it costs you $200 per month. Wow. $200 per month for the top model. This DeepSeek is on par with that model, and you can use it free of charge. Not only that, if you're a developer that needs to use the API, so let's say you're writing a piece of software or an app that uses one of these large language models as a back end, they charge you, the companies that run these large language models charge you to access their large language model through the cloud. DeepSeek is 20 to 30 times cheaper than the American models. So all these developers around the world have gone, wow, this is like a golden gift to us. You know, we can now charge less to the public for our applications because we can use DeepSeek. And literally so much of the AI developer community has jumped onto DeepSeek. This is like it's really upset the apple cart as far as the AI industry goes, for sure.
I remember back in, I think it was around about the 90s, I was studying business management and the word disruptor came into play. A business model that was a disruptor to the norm. This is it, isn't it? This is the biggest
absolutely,
in technology history. This is the industrial revolution for digitization.
It is. I mean, if you look at all the American companies' models, and this was my concern, and I've spoke to people about this, you know, more than a year and a half ago. I remember having a conversation with my son earlier about this. There's the danger about these companies developing AI in the US. They want to keep it all for themselves, and then what they can do, they can charge people. And I was worried that the best AI would only be available to the richest people. I mean, I feel if you want to access the best ChatGPT model, $200 a month is a lot of money. And they would keep pushing that. So what would happen over the time, the best AI would only be available to the rich. And
corporations and individuals who can afford it.
And DeepSeek have actually just exploded that out the water. And the interesting thing is, I think I forget his name, Jerry, but the CEO of DeepSeek, well, most of these guys are from Zhejiang University, and this is something else that's got the Americans scratching their head. I've seen a few comments saying, oh, they've done this without people from like MIT and Harvard, you know, as if somehow, you know, the only fantastic engineers must come from MIT and Harvard. You know, these are all guys from Zhejiang University. And the CEO has said, look, it's not about making money. It's about providing AI to humanity to improve people and lives and solve problems in illnesses and all this kind of thing. And actually, if you look back when OpenAI started, that was their vision until Microsoft came along with billions of dollars
and said, we'll have some of that.
Yeah. And then like Sam Altman, who's running OpenAI, his sort of vision changed from being this like, philanthropic, do good for humanity to, oh, yeah, now we're getting all this money. We can make lots of money out of it. Well, their business model has just been completely blown out the water. And something else that's really interesting, ByteDance are also very, very big into AI. In fact, in 2025, they've announced they will invest $20 billion into AI infrastructure. Yeah. But because of the news from DeepSeek, actually ByteDance announced a new model, Duoblo, I think it's called. I may pronounce that wrong, but the very next day, which is also on par with all the models that US companies have got. And, you have iFlyTech. Now, probably most people outside of China will have never heard of iFlyTech, but for many years, they've been developing AI. And about a year ago, I was at a technology exhibition. I forget where it was. It wasn't in Shenzhen, but they were demonstrating their AI model. And at that time, I thought, wow, this seems actually better than the ChatGPT I'm using. But because they're developing things behind the scenes, iFlyTech, if you come to China and you want a translation device, they have some of the best translation devices in the business, but they're also massive into AI. But I think one thing why a lot of these things are such a big surprise, I know that China have been developing AI for quite some time, for some years. I've seen it in factories. But where the US and the West have gone along this line of making it very sort of for the public, up until recently, China have not been doing that. They've been using it in industrial situations. Like, for example, I know that Huawei use a lot of AI in their telecommunications equipment. For switching, for power saving. So they're switching things on and off by, they're getting weather fed into that AI model. They're getting the timings, dark and light, and all this kind of thing. So I think China used the AI more on the industrial side, and they've only recently started pushing it to the consumer side, where I don't think America have got that much industrial side. I think a lot of their AI has been about consumer.
I'd like to draw a little bit of an analogy between the AI development in America and the military development in America, and compare those two things just very quickly. The AI and development here seem to have been done pretty much on shoestrings. China has the world's largest navy now in terms of the number of ships, not in terms of tonnage, not yet, but it will do. China has got the hypersonic missile. It's done all of this on a quarter of the budget that the US. It's actually, and many, I read a lot of stuff about this. Many defense analysts now believe China is more advanced militarily than America. It doesn't have as many bombs. It doesn't have as many nuclear warheads, but it does have a better capability of defense. America has no defense capability, only has an aggression capability, but it's done it all on a quarter of the budget. And now we're seeing in the technology world, and we're going to talk more about the technology. I mean, one of the things I love is DJI. I absolutely
DJI are amazing.
I love DJI, and they're a Shenzhen company. They all seem to be developing massive projects at minimal costs. Why do you think that might be?
Well, I think from a point of view, in the military industrial complex in the US is all about making profit. Everything, actually, it's a very capitalist society, so everything is about making money. Whereas I don't feel that's such a thing. I mean, you're probably aware of that post that somebody made where the US military were procuring some, they were like bolts or screws.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, these are $46. It's because a lot of these companies in the US who manufacture their military equipment are just basically looking to make as much money out of these huge, government contracts as they can. Whereas I don't think that's the case in China. I think people are more collective in China, where it's like we need to do things for the good of the country, not to make. I appreciate that companies make money, and companies in China do make a lot of money, but I also think there's much more of a socialist vibe runs through everything that's done here. It's to like benefit the people. I mean, DJI are incredible, and it just kind of makes me smile. Like, America. Oh, we've got to sanction all these companies because they work with the military. Well, literally every tech company in the US works with their military. Like Amazon, Google. They all have huge military contracts because it makes them a lot of money. Musk's, SpaceX, most of the income from that comes from, governments, US governments. And why should it be any different for China, really? I don't know.
So the bottom line basically is the word that I've seen repeated a few times on X, and that's bloated. America has bloated it out with massive profits. That bag of screws.
Sure.
There was a great TikTok video about that. A guy who runs a factory somewhere in Ningbo or somewhere like that with a bag. I'll sell you these for $12.90. RMB.90 for a packet. The same packet that was $7,000 or something like that. $70,000.
But I feel this is the same with infrastructure. So like if I look at England, it's like, every piece of infrastructure built, we've got to start making money in the first 12 months. And the one that's always criticized here by the West is the high-speed rail network. It's losing massive amounts of money in China, blah, 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 blah. But they don't understand the points, not that it was built to make money.
That's right.
The point is that it was built to provide easy transport for the population here, and overall and over time, this is not infrastructure that the capital amount spent now and in 3 years' time it's all written off. This is infrastructure that'll last for 40, 50 years, and you can't measure the impact to the wider economy, which is probably massive. I mean, just over New Year now, they will facilitate tens of millions of rail journeys. That means tens of millions of people will get back to see their families at New Year for a reasonable price. There's people that 15 years ago, it would have took them 2 or 3 days to travel back to their hometowns from the cities. But now they can do that in 7-8 hours.
Yeah.
And this is what the West don't get. They just, everything the West do, because it's a capitalist society. We're building this road. It needs to make money from, the first 6 months. But they don't do things like that in China. And that's what the West, I think, really failed to understand. And that's the same with, I think, everything in the Chinese society. The overriding thing is not to make money. It's to serve the people.
Yeah, I often look at this and say the return on investment in the West needs to be 2.7 years or whatever it is that their calculators say it should be. The return on investment here is what's the benefit to the people. Then we'll worry about the money. And they do get their money back. I mean, there are lines.
Absolutely.
I went up and down to Beijing just 2 weeks ago. I spent 5 days in Beijing, and the public transport system was as busy as all hell. And it wasn't public holiday yet. It was just a normal day. You get into the train station and there are a couple of thousand, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people there.
Yeah.
But you go there today and there will be 23,000 or 24,000 people there.
That's right. I made a video about a year ago about the new train station in Guangzhou, and it was kind of a soft opening. It was open, but it wasn't kind of quite finished. And I had so many comments on it. It's empty, blah, blah, blah. And I even said in the video, I says, yeah, it's empty now because China Don't think, oh, we need a railway station because there's too many people, and then start building it. And 3 years later, by the time they've built it, it's already too small. Trying to think, right, how many people are going to be needed to go through this station in 10 years' time? Right, we'll build for then. So maybe for the first year or two, it's running maybe at 50% capacity. But they know that in 10 years' time, once they extend the high-speed rail network and have different routes coming in, this will be one of the largest stations in Guangdong. It's the Guangzhou Baiyuan station.
Oh, yeah, that used to be known as Guangzhou North.
That's right. It's on the site of the old
Guangzhou North, Guangzhou
old
Bay.
station, yeah. But because there wasn't that many people in there in my video, all the way, so, oh, look, another waste of money, blah, blah. I said, look, come back at New Year or come back in a couple of years' time. This place will be absolutely heaving. I've seen this time and time again. I've spent many years in China. I remember when I lived in Guangzhou, they built this new shopping center. And for the first year, it was like maybe 10% of the shops are rented in there. And even at the time, I'm saying, well, this is a bit of a disaster. I went back to Guangzhou 3 years later. My God, every shop is rented. The place is absolutely buzzing, because that's how they do things in China. They build for the future. They don't build for the past like they do in the West,
Well, in fact, they don't build in the West. They just renovate the past. Luke, Living La Vida Luca, or Living La Vida Luke, is back in the UK. Oh no, Jason! It was Jason Lightfoot is back.
Jason, yes.
Jason is back in, and he's comparing
Broken Britain.
Yeah, Broken Britain was his last video. Yes, yeah, and Luke is just moving from Shanghai to Chengdu. I think that was what I was thinking.
Xinjiang.
He was joking. He was joking about Xinjiang. He's not going to live in Xinjiang. He said that on.
Sure?
I don't think so.
I think he is, because he's actually invited me. He was talking about his apartment. I think the Chengdu, he's just staying there for a few days on his way. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think his girlfriend is from Xinjiang.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Fernando has just confirmed it. It's Xinjiang. So I misunderstood something there. Chengdu is a holiday.
But
we need that.
He's a great example of the opportunities that are available in China. When I know Luke quite well, I've met him a few times, and he's a fellow English guy. And the last time I spoke to him, when he first came here, he came here to do his PhD. He's a very smart guy. He's very good at maths, and his PhD was studying AI to help with the diagnosis and treatment of cancer. And when he first came, his idea was that he was going to get his PhD in China and then search for a job in the US, because at that time he honestly thought the opportunities were better in the US. But over the time he's been here, he's realized that actually there's much better opportunities in China. So I think he's submitted his final paper for his PhD. He's waiting for it to be published in a journal. And during that time, he's taken a job as a maths teacher in Xinjiang.
Wow.
But once he gets his paper published and he graduates, whatever it's called, he gets his PhD, he then wants to work in a Chinese AI company. And one other thing I'd just like to say, if there are any young British people watching, it's really, really a good idea to think about coming to study in a Chinese university. They not only do courses that are taught in English, okay, there are less courses in English than there are in Chinese, but many young people find it quite easy to learn Chinese anyway. But Luke, they not only covered all his university costs, but they also gave him an amount of money each month for living expenses, like to spend on whatever he wanted to.
A stipend.
Like you go through university, and it's not just for PhDs. You can come and do your degree here, you can do your master's here, you can do your PhD here. And basically, this is, again, why there's a big difference in China, because students go to university, do their master's, do their PhD, and they don't come out of it with tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of debt. most of them come out of it with no debt. So I mean, you might know better than me on this, Joe. I think to do a degree here at university is about $1,000 a year or something.
My wife did as an adult about more than 10 years, about 15 years ago. My wife and I closed the business down. I went back into the education industry as a teacher, kind of a senior level, but I was given an offer that it was very hard to refuse, and I had to close my business down. And my wife and I were working in that together. And she went back to university to do a degree. She didn't have a degree in English. She wanted a degree in English and Japanese. So she went back to university as an adult. She was older than most of her teachers, but she was in her late 30s at the time. So she went back there, and all of her classmates were 18, 19, 20 years old. And she went to Guangzhou, so she had to reside in the dormitory. The entire fee for 4 years, was less than 80,000 RMB. That's about 10 to 11,000 US dollars. It's about 9,000 pounds. And that included her accommodation and her food. All the food she gets on a card. The card was for the canteen. So, I mean, if she ate off campus, she had to pay for her own food. It didn't include transportation.
Sure.
So she would have to get herself, she'd come home on Friday evenings and go back on Sunday evenings. And for 4 years, that entire fee was 80,000 RMB, including, it was dormitory accommodation shared with 3 other girls, but she made some great friends there.
That's fantastic. Well, in the UK, it's more than that for 1 year, a lot more than that. But the thing I want to point out, the Chinese government, Luke's scholarship was with the Shanghai government, the government of Shanghai, not the central government. But a lot of the provincial governments and central governments have a huge amount of scholarships specifically for foreign students to study in China. The only thing I would say is if you're watching this and you do think you want to apply directly to the university, find their website and don't go through a middleman, because some of them might try to rip you off. Just go directly to the university. They will all have, I would imagine, pages in English where you can apply. But there are a lot of, I think they're offering just like 50,000 scholarships over the next numerous years to Americans. And only something like 500 or 600 were taken up last year. I find that crazy.
Free university, but you have to come to China. This is Xi Jinping's people to people.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, I would say 99% of those Americans that do come to China, when they're here, they absolutely love it.
Probably never want to go back.
Most of them don't. They don't want to go back because they realize that the society in China is like so much better than certain areas in US society. Anyway, we digress a little bit. I just want to get there because
we were talking about the future of China and where China is going, and that was a good digression actually, because if China's universities are have an incredible future. They are already in the top 10 universities of the world inside of China. And inside of China, there are some extremely good, and obviously the results of things like this DeepSeek coming out of the same university as quite a few other initiatives. And I think Zhejiang has got an incredible amount of people coming out of it with really, really good ideas. And they're developing them in university. They're not like in the West. Most of the university developers drop out because they start making money. And Mark Zuckerberg is a university dropper. Smart guy, obviously. He could have graduated if he wanted. Bill Gates, university dropper. They see the opportunity to make money as far more important than finishing their degree. Chinese people are different. They will use their idea to study. This is my thesis. This is my assignment. This is my dissertation. And they will submit the stuff that is now commercially operating. So they're doing it slightly differently here. Great universities. So that was a good digression. Let's get back.
I think according to one of the Nature indexes, 8 out of the 10 top universities are now in China.
It may not be universities, but it may be colleges. But
because you have the Academy of
So, for
Chinese
example,
Sciences and things.
MIT is still the #1 technical university in the world, but the #1 science college is Tsinghua's University of Sciences and Tsinghua's University of Computing. They have overtaken the specific fields of MIT, so they're up there now. There is one actual university ranking, and I think China now has 2 in the top 10 of that total university ranking. Tsinghua and Peking, I think, or it might be Pudong. Anyway, there are 2. So I haven't looked at that for a long time. There might be more by now, but recently there were 2. Let's come back to the GBA where we both live. Now, I'm going to talk just 1 minute about infrastructure. You and I live on opposite sides of a 60-kilometer wide river. How long does it take to get from my house to your house?
Oh, now it's about an hour now?
Yeah,
maybe
it
less.
literally is an hour. We've got a new. It's called a link. It's not called a bridge, and it's not called a tunnel. It's got 3 bridges and a tunnel and 2 artificial islands, and this is the future of the Greater Bay Area. They are now building a train line from Zhongshan to Shenzhen, or Zhuhai to Shenzhen. Somewhere around the borderline of Zhongshan and Zhuhai, there will be a train link as well, and eventually we'll be linking by train. At the moment, if I want to catch a train to visit you, I have to go all the way into Guangzhou and then come all the way down south again. So I go 100 kilometers north, come 100 kilometers south, and we can see each other. Alternatively, in 18 minutes, I can be on the bridge. It takes 40 minutes to get across the bridge, and then another 15, 20 minutes to get to you. That's pretty good, isn't it? That's the infrastructure. What else is going on in Shenzhen?
Oh, God, there's so much. I mean, we have here some of the big companies that Westerners might have heard of. We have DJI, we have Insta360, we have Huawei. And I just like to speak a little bit about Huawei because almost a year ago now, it was just before Chinese New Year last year, I bought the Huawei Ito M5 car. And the reason I chose that car is because I'm really into technology, and from a point of view of the assisted driving, that was the most advanced car available in China at that time. Now, when I bought that, we were on ADAS version 2. And I would say at least every month, I've had an over-the-air upgrade to that software. But about 3 months ago, there was a major upgrade to version 3. I think we're on now version 3.2 or something like that. So there's been a couple of smaller ones. But I would say that the difference that I've noticed, now it was good when we had it, but it would make some silly mistakes. It's fantastic on the highway. It's absolutely, hands down, is brilliant. But driving around Shenzhen roads, it made a few... I wouldn't say their software made the mistake. I think sometimes the problem is that other drivers, human drivers, are breaking the rules, like they're crossing solid lines or they're parking in areas where they shouldn't be. But something else to remember about Chinese city roads, there's like so much more on them than there would be on the equivalent like British roads. You have literally people, hundreds of people on e-bikes. You have these delivery drivers on e-bikes, and a lot of them, they are a bit crazy. They will take ridiculous chances in the traffic. So this makes the AI driver very nervous. But I would say that the amount it's advanced in just that year is very, very noticeable. Now, I can pretty much now set off from my home and tell it to drive to pretty much anywhere in Shenzhen with very minimal human intervention, like minimal. Maybe once or twice, occasionally I have to intervene. And that's not necessarily because it's done something wrong. It's because maybe it's hesitating a little bit more than it should. Obviously, these AI driving programs always err on the side of caution. They have to. But that's something, and I'm lucky enough to know the Huawei guy who's the head of this project. And about 2 months ago, I was at an event and I bumped into him. He said, "Oh, I've just come back from California." He says, "Oh," he says, "Yeah, me and some of the team, we went there for 5 days to test out Tesla's latest, you know, auto driving feature in the car." And I says, "Well, what did you think?" Now, okay, maybe he has a bit of bias because he says, "We are way ahead of it." And I think that's really interesting because Tesla are apparently going to introduce their driver assistance package onto the cars sometime in 2025. They've had to host the data in a Chinese data center, which I believe they're doing. But I think it will be very, very interesting when they launch, just to see, because I personally think having assisted driving in the US and assisted driving in China are two very, very different things. I think Chinese cities, from a point of view of doing that, are some of probably the most difficult in the world because of the amount of pedestrians, the amount of e-bikes and that. So I think that's really, really interesting. Other things that I've been impressed with, we went to Hunching not long ago, and they are developing a huge semiconductor industry there. And they're doing that in collaboration with the University of Macau. And I got to interview one of the professors, and I asked him a fairly straight question. I says, "Look, in your opinion, with all your expert knowledge of the semiconductor industry and the sanctions that have been put on pretty much the semiconductor equipment, the US won't let China buy the machines from the Dutch company ASML." I says, "Tell me, when do you think China will catch up or overtake the West?" He says, "Within 10 years. Now, Westerners will go, 'Oh, that's a long time, blah, 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 blah.' But again, this is where they misunderstand Chinese thinking. Chinese think much longer term than the West because they don't have this 4 or 5 year political cycle, where everything changes. So they can make much long term now. So they for China, it's like, well, okay, we may have a bit of a problem now, but in 5 years' time. And I also feel, and I follow one particular guy on Twitter called TP Huang, and he seems to be very well connected to people within the tech industry in China, and he has some very, very good insights, and he reckons this year there will be some big announcements made in the technology industry that will be sort of pretty shocking to the world.
You mean apart from the two that we've already had this year?
Apart from the two we've already had, and I think now there's a lot going on behind closed doors that China don't want anybody to know anything about until it's actually ready for prime time. And one example of that was the Huawei phone. Again, it's over a year ago now, but they knew they were going to get backlash on that phone, and they announced it because I think the backlash they'd already anticipated that was going to happen further.
You actually did. You did the unboxing video on that. That was
I did, yeah.
I loved that video because it's like it's made. But that's not even their best phone anymore. They've gone one better.
That's right. Yeah, they have. But I think China are really gaining confidence now in their tech. When the sanctions were first applied, they kind of went a little bit quiet. Huawei went into like a bit of a hibernation for a couple of years where they got their heads down and worked through the problems. And interestingly, Huawei have developed a 5G modem for mobile phones, something Apple were not able to do. Apple is still having to buy it. I think it's from Broadcom. And for 2 or 3 years, Apple have kept saying, "Oh, we want our own 5G modem," but they haven't been able to do it. Huawei did it. So I think there's a lot of confidence now within China tech. And I think that if you're not into semiconductors, you probably won't know, but there's one major bottleneck, and that's the bottleneck of lithography. But there's many snippets of news appearing quite often now that, they've made a breakthrough here, they've made a breakthrough there. And very soon, all these breakthroughs are going to be put together, and at the moment that China, cracks EU lithography, it's game over for the US as far as semiconductors are concerned.
Well, let's move on and go outside of China's borders now. We know that there's this kind of dispute between US and China, EU and China. How is all this technology going to benefit the developing world? Because it seems to me that's the direction China is taking. What's going to happen with, what are China going to do to help the developing world, or are they already doing it?
Well, I think there's things already. I know Huawei have a program where in Africa where they teach IT skills to a lot of young people there who wouldn't be able to get that. And this open source, this is the key to it. This is saying, like, we're not going to keep the technology for ourselves and only sell it to the people who can afford it. We're gonna develop this technology, and we're gonna let anybody who wants use it. So this opens that latest technology up to the poorer, underdeveloped countries. They can use that same technology. They can train their young people how to program, because if their young people have to pay $200 a month to an American company like OpenAI, it's not going to happen for them, because $200 a month is a huge amount of money to those people. But if they can have all this for free, the world's their oyster. And I think this is, if you listen to the way Xi Jinping here talks, it's about China doing things to benefit humanity, not be spiteful and keep it all for ourselves. And this again, I think is a what annoys me a little bit is I constantly see on all the social media. I use X quite a lot, and I say, "Oh, it's a race." There's one organization in the US this week published this full-page advertisement in one of the big papers in the US. The US must win the AI race. Why must it be a race?
Yeah. Why can't it be shared community?
Why can't it be a cooperation? And if you go to academia, for many years, academia have worked together to solve problems and better humanity. The AI models that they're currently doing, within the next 2 to 3 years, we are going to see things that you couldn't even imagine 5 years ago. There's going to be cures for diseases that were never imagined possible just 5 years ago. So this is beneficial to everybody, not just selling it to the people that have got the most money. And I see that China's whole philosophy is to help humanity.
I want to come in with a great example of how China does this, because this happened to me personally. I was in hospital recently with thrombosis, and I, for the next 6 months, or for 6 months from that date at least, I have to take blood thinning tablets. I went to the hospital recently, and the guy said to me, we've been giving you these American tablets. He said, do you want to try the Chinese locally made tablets? They're exactly the same thing. They're in fact made in the same factory. And I said, sure. He said, it'll be a little bit cheaper. I said, it doesn't bother me. It was costing me 770 RMB for 1 month supply of these tablets. And he gave me the prescription. Well, he didn't give me anything because it's all done on a computer. This is another technology thing. He put it on the computer. I went outside, I paid. Then I went down to the pharmacy without any pieces of paper apart from a receipt for my payment. I went down to the pharmacy where my thing was up on the notice board waiting for me. What I paid for my $770 last month, I got 2 months supply of the same medicine for 64 RMB.
Wow.
That tells you
I had a very similar thing when I was having my chemotherapy. I was offered the US chemotherapy drug or the Chinese one. And again, I took the Chinese, and it was significantly cheaper. It was something like 7 times cheaper than, and this is a generic one, because for breast cancer, they had to use the same chemotherapy that was developed like years and years ago, because they haven't found anything better yet. But AI will actually transform, and medicine is one of the biggest areas. I mean, there's people now talking. Now, I don't know whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, that within 5 to 10 years, AI will have, develop things where people can live significantly longer.
Yeah.
Because the treatments, diseases today that now kill people and they have no cure for, they will be able to treat and have cures. And you won't have a medicine that's for everybody. The medicine will be engineered just for you by AI. And
it's already starting to happen. A friend of mine here had a problem, and he, believe it or not, he went to one side of his house and he got sick, and he went back to the other side of his house and felt better. Turned out that he had mercury poisoning. He had some metabolism issue that was allowing mercury to build. Everyone gets mercury in their body, but your system deals with it. And his system wasn't dealing with it. And he didn't find this out until he had a DNA test. So they specifically gave him medicine for his specific DNA. No one else's DNA, just his. The medicine was designed for him. Now, it cost him a lot of money, and he had to go to Hong Kong to do it, but it was done. Now, I don't know if it was an American system or where it came from, but he couldn't get that done in China yet. So this is an example of how things can develop. He actually literally had to move house as a result of this.
Wow.
And it was 5G causing him the problem. So all of those conspiracy theorists, yes, there is something in this. He had a 5G tower behind his house, which wouldn't bother you or I. But when he went near to the 5G, it reacted with the mercury that was stored up in his system. And that was a huge problem for him. He's sorted now. He's still got some medical problems that he needs to resolve. But effectively, once he got that, and it was only through DNA testing that they found this out, and then tailor-made the medicine for him. It's exactly right.
Yeah.
So
but back to your initial question, I think where American companies want to develop this AI to make as much money as they can out of people, I think China take exactly the opposite approach, where they want to develop this AI and share it with everybody so everybody can benefit. And I think that's the big difference. And I think that's why we see, Meta are doing open source, but most of the other American companies are, where I think a majority of the companies developing it in China are looking at the open source model. And they will still make money. They will still make money from it, but it won't be a technology that's only available to the 1% in the world. It will be available to many. And I think from what I see, China will make a big push for technology into Africa. Again, you look at America, they complain that China have all this influence in Africa. Well, America and the West had 60 years. They raped Africa of all the resources and gave nothing back. China going with a different model. Okay, it may not be a perfect model, but Africa are benefiting because China want to raise the standard of living in Africa. Whereas I feel the US just wanted to keep them down so the US can dominate them. Whereas China don't see it like that. China see it, well, if we raise their standard of living, we can, they will buy more things from us. We will do more trade with us. Everybody benefits. Well, America doesn't see it like that. They see it that we want to keep everybody subjugated so we can control everything, And I think the world's changing now, and I think America are kicking and screaming. And
it's not just America. I watched a great interview, or part of a great interview, with the leader of Burkina Faso, and this guy's a hero. The Americans can do all the color revolutions they want. They're not going to get this guy unseated. They're going to have to kill him if they want to remove him. And that wouldn't be the first time that's happened either. But this guy, his plan is for a united Africa. He's looking like a European Union style thing, but each African country maintaining their own independence and sovereignty, but working together without having to worry about what everybody else wants to do. And he's kicked out the French already. So that's a good start.
That's a good start for sure.
But it's a good start for him. And I think within a year or so of doing so, Burkina Faso no longer has any international debt. It's been paid off. So
interesting.
It's put his country into a good position. He sees Africa, as I do and have done for a long time. Africa's not a poor nation, a poor continent. It is a raped, pillaged, and exploited continent, which has left the people poor. but it's very, very rich. It's rich in all kinds of resources. All the gold
Yes.
under the vaults in France didn't come from France. France doesn't have any gold. It all came out of Central Africa and a few other places too. So that's going to be very interesting. Now, let's go back to where we're going. We know that Huawei has done it. We know that inside of the chip industry, you talk to the guy who says 10 years we'll have self-reliance, or maybe we'll have self-reliance sooner, but 10 years before we take over.
Yeah. He said within 10 years.
Okay.
You know?
So is that taking over and being better than America, or is that being self-reliant? Because I think now we may already, and this isn't what the question, basically, have we achieved or are we achieving in China self-reliance in any of these? And have you got any examples of that?
In legacy chips, they are now self-reliant, and that's
Right.
sort of anything kind of above 10 nanometer. They are doing 7 nanometer, but that's very difficult at the moment because they're actually doing 7 nanometer with machines that were not really designed to do 7 nanometer, but they are still achieving it. So they are self-sufficient in all but the latest cutting edge semiconductors. Now, interestingly, the latest cutting edge semiconductors are not used in probably 95% of devices that semiconductors are used in. Even in a lot of military devices, they don't use the latest cutting edge semiconductors. They use older semiconductors at a higher node. But China have the ability to design the chips. Huawei have a division called High Silicon, and they're ranked as within the top 10 in the world of chip designers. China have no issue. And in fact, interestingly, one of the ways China has overcome some of the sanctions is just getting smarter in the design of the older node chips by doing things like stacking, chiplet technology. I won't go too much into it because it's quite technical, but it's kind of, instead of having one big chip die on one piece of silicon, you split it into smaller ones and build. They're like little building blocks, and you build a more complex chip with smaller, less complex. Kind of, yeah. So packaging and chip technology, layering and stacking are all technologies China have perfected or got really good at, and that's in some way. It's almost like you can make an older node chip perform as well as a sort of newer node chip by using some of these techniques. But the big bottleneck is the lithography. So the design's not an issue, but the lithography is the big problem at the moment. And there's only one company. It's all right, America saying, oh, you know, but there's only one company in the world that makes those machines currently, and that's a Dutch company. And the previous CEO of the Dutch company, a guy called Wennick, he was very critical of the ban because he basically said that it's only a matter of time before China create this machine themselves. You know, at the end of the day, it was not produced by God. You know, it was produced by humans. And he said it's only a matter of time before China produces it. And when China produces, it'll be produced at a fraction of the cost. So they're losing a huge amount of sales. China was spending billions of dollars on orders on these machines, and they were not allowed to be shipped. So when China gets its own, it's not going to buy the ones from ASML.
Yeah.
And also, it will start selling its machines to other countries. So ASML will lose even more business. So going back to your question, I personally think within 5 years, they will have sorted it. There's a lot going on. You see lots of news snippets about all different bits of the puzzle, but it'll all be coming together. And so it's only those latest semiconductors that they're not self-sufficient in. A lot of the others. And actually, it's kind of funny because now they've become very good. They're massively expanding their market share in older node semiconductors. This is panicking the West now because literally China are making them at a fraction of the cost of Western companies. You know, even TSMC and some of the Taiwanese foundries are losing orders to Chinese mainland companies because at the end of the day, I feel these Western companies, they will say as much as that they like about China, but if you're building a product that needs a semiconductor, and you've got this one here, which comes from an American ally, and it costs $3, and you've got exactly the same thing here, and it comes from a Chinese foundry, it costs $1. You're going to buy the $1 one,
Of course you are.
because that will either make your company more profitable, or it will make you more competitive.
Yeah,
it's simple.
As Williams just put up, the Peter Wernick said the laws of physics in China are the same as the laws of physics in the Netherlands. China
Exactly.
will. It's exactly right.
Yeah.
Thanks, William.
China will do it. They have, and you'll know about this, and a lot of people say this. They graduate 7 times more STEM engineers and scientists than America do each year. Year. So they've got a massive talent pool. Huawei have just built a new facility campus in Shanghai. They're going to staff that with 30,000 of the brightest people from around the world. And one of their main focuses on, solving this lithography problem.
Yeah,
it's just a matter of time.
Every problem that comes up as it arises, they're well ahead of us. I've got a question about open sources, because this has bothered me for a little while, and I don't know the answer to this. Normally, I don't like to ask a question I don't know the answer to, but I'm going to hit you with this one. When a product such as DeepSeek is open source, if someone uses that open source product to create something else, are they able to commercially use that, or do they have to then open source their own iterations of it?
I believe that they can use it. I think there are different kinds of open source license, but I think the main one is that it's then free. And a lot of those companies who open source software just rely on donations. Actually, there's a piece of software called Blender, which is like a 3D design software, and that is funded totally on donations. So I think I'm 99% sure. I think there are some open source licenses where you have to buy a license, but generally then I think it's very minimal cost. One of the most ridiculous things that and this blew my mind many years ago. So Microsoft, if you have a Windows server, right, running Windows Server operating system, and you have 20 PCs all have Windows on them, you then have to buy an additional license to be allowed to connect that computer running Windows to the server running Windows. And let's say it's, I don't know, $50, $80. You imagine a corporation with 20,000 computers who want to connect them. Now, they've already bought the server, they've already bought the software on the server, they've already bought the computer and the software on the computer, but they need to connect them together. Oh, Microsoft make you buy a license to do that. And you have to buy a license for every single machine in the organization. And that's why open source DeepSeek is such a big deal, because corporations will be able to use it, host it on their own computer, and not worry about hundreds of thousands of dollars in license fees to companies like Microsoft or OpenAI. So it really is a game changer.
Yeah, which is why I see this as what I call the Kodak moment. Open source is free until you run it in a commercial setting. Then you probably have to pay for the license so that you can make money on it, which does make sense.
But I think a lot of open source, you don't have to. I'm 99% sure about it. Maybe there's some people in the audience who know better, but as far as I believe, if it's open source, it's open source. And people are even free to change it, to modify it. So like a good example where open source was a game changer was on a mobile phone handset. So Android is an open source, and any company was able to adapt that to their own, like Samsung or Oppo or Vivo or Xiaomi. They were able to adapt that Android into their flavor,
right.
Because that was an open source software.
Okay. That makes sense.
So there may be a small license fee, but I'm not 100% sure. I think there's different.
We can come back to that. I call this my Kodak moment. I'm old enough to remember. You're probably a little young for
Me
this.
too. No, I remember Kodak.
You remember Kodak moments? It was a huge advert around Christmas time. Get the camera out. This is a Kodak moment. Now, about 50 years ago, maybe less than that, it was the Kodaks, the IBMs, the Hewlett Packards. They were the top corporations. Kodak disappeared off the face of the earth. Now, I'm sure they still exist in some iteration or some form, but Kodak disappeared because they were completely blindsided, I think, by the digital approach. And Kodak Eastman were a film company making cameras, and they said, well, we'll never replace films. And they did. IBM disappeared for the same reason. There's a very famous quote of the CEO of IBM saying there'll never be a need for an IBM computer on every home. It's just not going to happen. And of course, that drove them down the wrong path. And Lenovo took over. Lenovo was a very interesting company because they started as IBM's builder in China and then bought IBM's computing. Yeah, that's a great story. That one. So do you think this is a Kodak moment? Is DeepSeek and are Huawei with their innovations and anyone else coming through? Also, I mean, in the camera world, DJI have killed GoPro as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I've used both. I've used both. This is the Osmo Action. I've got the Osmo Action 4, and in the next day or so, I'm going to buy the Action 5. It is
me too.
Good. Are you? Let's get
the main reason I'm going to buy it is because the Action 5 supports both of the wireless DJI microphones, where the 4 only supports one single one. So I'm going to buy it for that reason.
So there you go.
Interestingly, just on licensing, if you look at Huawei, if you look when American companies there's some, and I forget the name, you might know it, there's certain patents that you have to license. They like for like networking or telecommunications. There's certain patents. I forget the name now, but that other people need to use, even though you invent them. If you want to operate a 4G network, you have to use other people's patents. So, but Huawei, when American companies have these, they often charge quite a lot. Huawei have a much fairer system where their patents that other people need, they license them much cheaper than most American companies actually. That's something that's quite interesting. But I do think this could be I think this DeepSeek for the AI world will be what Android was for the mobile phone world.
Yeah.
And I also think literally the day after DeepSeek made that announcement, OpenAI says, we're now going to offer a better model on our free tier.
Yes. Price had to come down. This question from Dachshund, it just came in. Nice discussions, Lee and Jerry. And this is basically what we started talking about today when we first got talking. This is what it was about. Driverless cars, robots or automation in factories and hotels and restaurants. We have taxis that can fly. He says we may have taxis that can fly. Well, believe it or not, we actually do have taxis that can fly now. And how do you feel about these technologies in your cities? Effectively, this question encapsulates exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. We do have already taxis that fly, and you can catch a taxi from my hometown to your local airport. And I think it takes 20 minutes across the 60-kilometer bay. And I believe it's not actually a taxi that can fly. It's not a helicopter. It's a manned drone. If such a, I mean, that's an oxymoron because drones shouldn't.
Well, actually, they are basically drones that a person can sit in. The technology is the same but bigger.
Yeah, the same but bigger. And you can actually catch this thing. It's not a helicopter, and you use this thing like a drone, but it's drone that's big enough to sit in. And I think Xpeng have already got cars.
Correct.
Yeah, that actually have them built in like a roof rack.
Correct.
Now, these are only concept cars at the moment. They're not operating. But that, to me, is something, this is what I would call white man's magic. This is stuff I really don't understand. Chinese governments have moved from selling real estate into a different world where they're selling the low altitude airspace. Have you heard of this?
Yeah, well, actually, Shenzhen are one of the pioneers of this low altitude economy. And this started where Meituan, which is the delivery company, if you order food on your phone here to be delivered to your house, often it will be a guy from a company called Meituan that will deliver that food on his e-bike. But and you must have seen the videos where people go into a park in Shenzhen and they order a coffee and it actually gets delivered by drone, because the a lot of these companies are based in the Greater Bay Area, in Shenzhen and some of these other sort of cities. So Shenzhen are really a pioneer of this low altitude economy, because they see, like the Chinese saw, when all the other car manufacturers sort of were pushing EVs aside, Chinese companies 10, 12 years ago were thinking, this is the next big technology. We need to invest in this. We need to secure supply chains and that. They're doing now exactly the same with the low altitude economy, because they see that this is going to be the next future thing. And I think they're pioneering the regulations on this, and I think that's a fantastic thing. Like
they're actually
say,
selling the airspace now. There's a couple of cities of.
I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah. Can we use the word piloted here, or is that too much of a pun? They're piloting sale of airspace in 2 or 3 different cities. And the view is that this is going to take over from some of the losses that were incurred when they restructured. And Fernando and I have talked about this many times. The what they call the real estate property crash. We call it a controlled demolition, but it was a controlled demolition that kind of went a little bit wrong. It didn't.
Hello?
Got a problem. Are you back? I'm back.
I'm back. Yeah,
me too. So it was a little more difficult than it was anticipated to be. But what then happened was that a lot of local governments found that they've lost their major source of income, which was real estate.
Yeah.
And so now they're going to replace that with low altitude airspace.
Wow.
And drone advertising. I mean, it's not just drone advertising, it's drone displays. This is a huge industry now.
Oh, yeah.
I'll be honest, I haven't seen one yet. I've only seen them on Twitter.
Oh, I've seen a couple. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And again, that's all through software. I mean, they put hundreds, if not thousands, of these drones on the ground. They all take up. There's no human doing anything. These are all controlled by a computer. Now, this is one of the reasons. It's all right that the US going, oh, we've got this and we've got that military. Actually, and we've seen this with the Ukraine conflict. War is, completely changed. It's not soldiers necessarily fight anymore. Any conflict between China and the US, which I hope to God never happens, it won't be fought by men with rifles. This will be fought by drone technology. And what you've got to realize, and I think this is why the US are so scared of China in one respect, is those drone displays. You imagine if you transferred that technology to the military, so you would have these what are called drone swarms.
It's already done.
Yeah, you launch 1,000 drones. That not necessarily to destroy an aircraft carrier, but they then act as like guidance systems for missiles and things like that. And China, I strongly believe China are many years ahead with drone technology than anyone else.
Yeah.
I strongly believe that.
They've got this hypersonic carrier killer. We know about that. And they've got a nice shape marked out in the desert, which is about the same size as the USS
aircraft carrier.
and they can hit it from moving trucks. I mean, this is just it takes they've got these moving trucks going around Inner Mongolia, and they can hit a square meter of land in Xinjiang. So this is going to be a bit of a worry. But you're right. If you think about a drone swarm, electronic warfare, there was a case just recently where a US Air Force plane flew over a Chinese ship and then set off its electronic jammers, and the ship didn't respond in any way, shape, or form, and just
I saw that.
kept on doing what it was doing. So if they're doing that, and they've got that technology to overcome the jammers, then 1,000 drones going towards an aircraft carrier, a few of them are going to get through. And once you've dropped a couple of kilos of explosive onto the deck of an aircraft carrier, you have a useless tub of lard floating around because it cannot land or take off until they've repaired that. And I'm sure if it's a well-timed or well-aimed and it hits the catapult or it hits the restraining clip, whatever they call that thing, that the wire that holds them when they land.
Catches the air,
yeah. If they get them damaged, they're screwed. They're not going to take off. They're not going to land. And what have you got there? A slow-moving target and nothing more. It can't defend itself. It can't even land its planes. Its planes are going to ditch in the water because there's nowhere to go unless they land in China, because that's where they're going to be. So it's going to be an interesting war if it happens. Like you, God forbid. I hope it doesn't.
Just a very quick story. I have a relative who's in the police in the UK, and he was about 8 months ago when I was back in the UK in May. He says, "Oh, we got a problem." He says, "We use DJI drones. So when they do like a drugs bust on a house, if they can't get access to the back of the house, they take a drone up to watch the back of the house, and then they can follow anybody that runs out the back."
Okay.
He says, we need some new drones. He says, because the ones we've got are 2 or 3 years old. We want the latest DJI ones. These are sort of not the ones we fly. They're a bit more commercial. They have like infrared sensors and all these
longer battery life, I hope.
Yeah, loud hailers and all that kind of stuff. He says, but the government have put a freeze on us buying the DJI drone. Says we've got to try and source some alternatives. He says, but we've looked around and there's not any alternatives.
No.
There are none, like none. And then I went back in November because the government have lifted the ban on us buying them now. We can buy them because basically there was no alternative. No company in the world manufactures anything that gets anywhere close to what DJI can do.
There's a very interesting similar story. There's only one organization in the United States that has an exemption from using the Huawei. It's still allowed to use the Huawei equipment, and it's the Pentagon.
It's bizarre. It's just funny, isn't it?
It just destroys the narrative about this is all about national security, But the
absolutely,
the Pentagon, for goodness sake.
Yeah, apparently they said they can't operate properly without using Huawei equipment.
Yeah. I don't know if they still have the exemption, but certainly they got an exemption.
They do.
The ban first. They do still have it. Okay.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, so that's
just
DJI.
Ludicrous, isn't it?
Yeah. So there's the future of China. We're coming up to 90 minutes. This has been a great chat.
It's so good.
I think I had a list of questions for you, but I think we've actually covered them all in the wrong sort of order. So and unless you want to do a wrap up for us, and then we'll call it a day at 90 minutes.
Sure. I mean, we've both lived in China a long, long time. We see what's going on here on the ground, and I think that what's happened in the last 2 weeks is people have realized what we've been trying to tell them for 5 years, and they haven't believed us. And now, I mean, one thing I really hope that comes out of this, I hope that more Westerners, after seeing this, they will actually come to China and experience it for themselves. And I know that inward tourism has increased significantly. I hope that keeps happening, because I think that when people do come here and they actually experience it themselves, they go away with a completely different mindset than they had before. There's always going to be that small group, and I've noticed this in comments of videos I've posted, that are always going to have this China negative thought. But I would like to think the majority of people have, a lot more
open-minded.
sensible thinking, open-mindedness. Yeah, for sure.
I made a video called "Desperate Trolls" the other day. It was in relation to Fernando and I had a 90-minute or an hour-long chat about the Red Note TikTok refugees thing, and it went very, very well. It's close to 50,000 views, which for me is huge.
That's great.
I've only got about 4 videos that have hit 50,000, and this is not yet one. I think it's 40-something thousand. But as a result of that, I got hit with a lot of. Normally, the trolling I get is maybe in 300 comments, I'll get 1 or maybe 2 negatives. It's less than 0.something%.
Fantastic.
99.8% is positive in the comment section. But on this one, I had about 3 or 4% negativity. And it did seem desperate. So I just collated a few of them and made a video called "Desperate Trolls," which went very well too. And now I've got some of the trolls trolling their own. They're coming back to me and saying, "Oh, I didn't say that." Well, you did say this, and I put this in there. So it's been a very interesting thing. There are people who are they're either paid to do what they do and besmirch China. There are people who are so racist, bigoted, blinkered, whatever the word you want to use, that they don't care that it might be true and aren't interested in finding out. And there are people who are too stupid to find out. There are those too. They're just ignorant to pick up a book and read and say, well, this could be true, and critically analyze something. But then there are the other 95%, 98, 99% who are going, wow, that's not what I expected when China opened its doors. Now, China never opened its doors. The Great Firewall has always been open for you to jump in and have a look. Now, even wider open, and people know about it, but it's always been the case. It's not there to keep people out. It's not there to keep people in. It's there to control the flow of information. And it does that very well.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it is very important that countries control their information space. I mean, if you look at Europe rely everything, all their social media is American.
Yes. Yeah.
I think China was sensible in developing. And actually, on a side note, I think this is some of the reason why these social media companies don't operate in China, because they know that not only do they have to set up a data center, which is very expensive, but I don't think some of them would easily get traction in China. China have a lot of social media apps that a majority of the Chinese people use. They don't need other foreign ones, because actually a lot of the Chinese ones are better than some of the foreign ones anyway. Yeah. So I think from a business point of view, some of these companies might think, we've seen this a lot with traditional companies. They think, oh, Chinese market's big, we can come and do everything the American way. And a year later, they've disappeared and gone bust because they don't, operate to the Chinese people. They think they can do it the Western way in China, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah, a great example of that was Walmart. It almost closed down after it opened up hundreds of stores, and then nobody went. Nobody shopped in Walmart.
A big American electronics store, was it Best Buy? I was in Shanghai. They opened all these flashy shops. 18 months later, they're all gone because they couldn't compete with China because they wanted to do it the American way. Gourmet. But I mean, I don't know how Gourmet are doing nowadays, because I haven't been into one of their stores for a long time.
Well, neither have I. You don't need to go shopping. You just buy everything online.
That's right, online.
And retail, a lot of retailers are going broke. That's bad news. A lot of retail stores are empty, but that doesn't mean retail is not surviving. It's just surviving differently here. And that's another thing we can talk about in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
We should probably call it a day there. We've gone over the 90 minutes that I promised, but it's very easy to keep talking to you, Lee.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'd like to say thank you very much to we had well over 250 and
fantastic
viewers at any given time there. So thank you very much to everyone for joining us. And Lee, thank you so much for your insights. You really
It's been a pleasure.